Welcome to the Hot News Channel, where we strip away the noise to analyze today's breaking stories. It is February 4th, 2026.
Good to be here. And, looking at the wire today, I'm not sure noise is even the right word for it anymore. It feels more like a siren.
It is absolutely deafening. Usually when we sit down for one of these deep dives, we're looking for that one signal in the noise. We pick a single major story, a bill passing, maybe a scandal, a shift in the markets, and we just drill down on it.
Right. We try to find the core of it.
But today feels qualitatively different. We're not just looking at one story, we're looking at a convergence.
A convergence of what you could call existential threats, really. And they're all peaking within this 48-hour window. It's extraordinary.
It really is. And we have to set the stage properly for you here. Tomorrow, February 5th, the New START treaty expires.
Mm-hmm.
That is the absolute last, the final nuclear guardrail between the United States and Russia. It evaporates in less than 24 hours.
And that leaves us with, and this is the critical part, zero limitations on deployed nuclear warheads. For the first time since, you have to go back to the darkest days of the Cold War to find a parallel.
And that's happening at the exact same time, literally at this very moment, that a U.S. naval armada is facing what some top analysts are calling a checkmate scenario right off the coast of Iran.
A checkmate that, and this isn't hyperbole, could completely redefine naval warfare for the next 100 years.
As if that geopolitical nightmare wasn't enough back home, Washington is currently reeling from the release of 2.7 million pages of the Epstein files.
And the timing on that feels suspicious, to say the least. The content is just radioactive, and you can feel the panic in the air.
It's palpable. So this isn't just another busy news day. This feels like a pivot point for the entire global order. So our mission today, our job, is to slow all of this down.
We have to.
We're going to dissect the hard data piece by piece. We're going to completely ignore the spin that's coming from the podiums, and we're going to tell you what the mainstream networks are, frankly, afraid to touch right now.
Let's get into it.
So let's start with the most immediate military crisis. The Persian Gulf, the Iran standoff. We're seeing all these headlines about tensions, the usual language.
Vague, non-committal.
Exactly. But I'm looking at these naval deployment maps, the ones provided by former CIA analyst Larry Johnson, and this doesn't look like tensions. This looks like a tactical nightmare unfolding in real time.
It is. I think the best way to understand it is to see it as the Red Sea scenario from last year, but on steroids. And to really grasp why it's a nightmare, you just have to look at the math.
Right. Let's do that. Larry Johnson did a direct comparison in his analysis to Operation Prosperity Guardian. That was March 2025, the big coalition that was assembled to stop the Houthis in Yemen.
And that context is absolutely vital. Because back in 2025, against the Houthis, who are, let's be honest, they're effectively a militia, a very well-armed militia for sure, but a militia nonetheless.
Not a state actor.
Not a state actor. And against them, the U.S. deployed 2 full aircraft carrier strike groups. 2. We had the Eisenhower and the Ford out there. We had a protective screen of 5 destroyers and cruisers. It was a massive projection of naval power.
So the objective was simple. Open the shipping lanes, keep the Red Sea clear. Did it actually work?
That's the uncomfortable truth, isn't it? No, it didn't. We were there for 7 weeks, 7 weeks of high-intensity operations. We flew hundreds of sorties, burned through millions of dollars in ordnance.
Yeah.
And the result?
What was the result?
We lost 3 F-18 Super Hornets, either to ground fire or just accidents related to the sheer operational tempo. The USS Eisenhower itself took a drone hit that was serious enough to require it to disengage for repairs. And the shipping lanes
still closed.
They remain closed to most Western traffic, so no, it was not a success.
So Johnson's core argument is essentially a scaling problem then. He's looking at the force currently parked off the coast of Iran, and he's pointing out that it's actually smaller than the force that failed to defeat the Houthis.
Exactly. That's the whole point. If 2 carriers and 5 destroyers couldn't suppress a militia in Yemen, how on earth is a smaller task force supposed to intimidate, let alone defeat, the Islamic Republic of Iran?
And we really need to be crystal clear about the difference in capability between the Houthis and Iran. We are not talking about guys in pickup trucks with, retrofitted drones anymore.
No, not even in the same league. Iran is the varsity team. Johnson's analysis actually lists the inventory metrics, and they are just staggering. Iran possesses something like 18 different types of ballistic missiles.
18.
18 distinct systems. They have 5 different classes of cruise missiles. They have 12 distinct types of combat drones. This is a sophisticated, layered defense system.
I saw a specific note in Johnson's breakdown about the drones. He mentioned the MQ-9 Reaper, our own drone.
Right. the Reaper. That's our workhorse. That drone cost the U.S. taxpayers about $35 million per unit. A few years back, Iran managed to capture one that went down, mostly intact.
And they reverse engineered it.
Completely. They now have their own fleet of clones. They have the same capability, but they can produce them for a tiny fraction of the cost.
Right.
So we're firing multi-million-dollar missiles to shoot down drones that cost them maybe a few $1,000s to build. The economics are disastrous.
This brings us to what's being called the 1,000-mile dilemma. I've seen this phrase floating around on defense blogs, but I want to really drill down into the physics of it. The reports are all suggesting that the U.S. ships are holding their position about 1,000 miles offshore.
Which is a very, very specific distance. It's not arbitrary.
Okay, so why? Why 1,000 miles?
It's the edge. It's the absolute edge of the kill zone. The Iranians' anti-ship ballistic missiles, we're talking specifically about the longer-range variants, some developed domestically, some provided by their allies, have a reliable, effective range of about 900 to 1,000 miles.
So, by staying just outside that ring, the admiral is keeping the fleet safe.
He's keeping the multi-billion-dollar carriers safe from a sudden saturation strike. He's preventing a Pearl Harbor moment.
Okay, that makes perfect sense from a force protection standpoint. You obviously don't want to lose a carrier on day one of a conflict. But here is the massive problem that Larry Johnson highlights in his piece: the Tomahawk cruise missile.
Our primary long-range offensive weapon. The thing that we would use to strike back. It's fired from our destroyers and cruisers.
And what's its range?
It's also roughly 1,000 miles.
So there it is.
And there is the checkmate. If you're parked 1,000 miles away to stay safe from their missiles, and your own missiles have a maximum range of 1,000 miles, you are operating at the absolute extreme limit of your reach.
Johnson put it. Well, he put it very bluntly. He said, if they fire the damn missiles, they're going to blow up a bunch of sand.
And he's right. You have to think about the flight path. A Tomahawk isn't some hypersonic wonder weapon. It's a subsonic cruise missile. It flies like a small airplane. It takes hours to fly that kind of distance.
Hours!
Yes. And by the time it finally reaches Iranian airspace, it's burned most of its fuel. It has very little energy left for maneuvering. It can hit the coast, maybe. It can crater a beach. But can it reach the deep inland, hardened missile silos? Can it get to the command and control centers in Tehran or Isfahan?
Absolutely not.
No. It just doesn't have the legs.
So to hit anything that actually matters, to degrade their ability to fight, the Navy has to move closer. They have to push in.
And the very moment they cross that invisible 1,000-mile line to get their Tomahawks into effective range, they simultaneously enter the umbrella of Iran's defenses. They fly right into the kill zone.
It's a perfect tactical deadlock. You can either be safe and completely useless, or you can be effective and potentially sunk.
And the Iranians know this. That's the key. This isn't a secret. That's why they aren't backing down. They can do the math just as well as anyone at the Pentagon can.
So let's talk about what happens if we do decide to move in. Let's game that out. Because it's not just about the missiles coming at our ships, it's about finding their targets on the ground. And we have some incredible analysis on this from Colonel Douglas Macgregor and also Professor Mohammad Marandi. They detail Iran's defensive doctrine. They call it shoot and scoot.
And this is really a masterclass in fourth-generation warfare, perfectly tailored for a mountainous country like Iran. The U.S. military, we're used to fighting adversaries with big, static bases.
Right. You look at a satellite map, you see the airfield, you see the barracks, you drop a JDAM on it, and it's gone. Problem solved.
But Iran doesn't operate like that.
Yeah.
Not anymore. They've spent the better part of the last 2 decades building what they themselves call missile cities.
That sounds like hyperbole, like propaganda. Missile cities.
It really isn't. We have the intelligence to back it up. We're talking about vast, reinforced concrete complexes buried hundreds of meters beneath the Zagros Mountains. These aren't just simple bunkers. They're entire logistical hubs. They have their own fuel depots, missile assembly lines, crew quarters, command centers, all deep underground.
And the shoot and scoot part of it, how does that work?
So they primarily utilize mobile launchers. These are massive trucks, TLOs, transporter erector launchers. They drive out of a tunnel portal that's been camouflaged to look like part of a cliffside.
Okay.
They erect the missile, they fire it, and then before a U.S. satellite can even register the heat signature and relay the coordinates to a bomber, the truck has already reversed back into the tunnel, and massive blast doors have sealed it shut.
So even if you have total air superiority, you're basically playing whack-a-mole against an entire mountain range.
Precisely. You can bomb that mountain all day long. You might chip the paint. You might make a lot of dust. But you weren't stopping their launch capability. It's an almost impossible target to neutralize.
And Colonel Macgregor, in his analysis, highlighted a new and very dangerous variable in this whole equation. It's foreign technology. We're not just dealing with Iranian engineering anymore, are we?
No, and this right here is the real game changer.
Yeah.
We now have confirmation, multiple sources on this, of Chinese DF-21 and DF-23 anti-ship ballistic missiles being delivered to Iran.
These are the infamous carrier killers.
That is the NATO designation for them, yes. The DF-21D in particular is a weapon designed for one single purpose: to hit a moving aircraft carrier at sea from over 1,000 kilometers away.
And it's not just a ballistic missile, it maneuvers.
That's what makes it so lethal. It maneuvers in flight during its terminal phase. It's coming in Mach 10 times the speed of sound. You cannot shoot it down with our standard defensive measures like the phalanx or the CRAM. They aren't designed to intercept something moving that fast and that erratically.
So let's put this all together. If the U.S. fleet moves into range to be effective, they are facing hypersonic anti-ship missiles being fired from basically invincible mountain bunkers.
It suddenly explains with perfect clarity why the fleet is staying 1,000 miles away. It's not caution, it's necessity.
I want to shift for a moment to the psychological aspect of this standoff. Alizadeh, a political commentator who follows the region very closely, he used this analogy that really stuck with me. He said, Iran is a cat. If you corner a cat, it becomes feral.
The Persian cat analogy.
Yeah.
And it's really a powerful critique of the entire U.S. diplomatic strategy of maximum pressure.
Alizadeh is arguing that the West, and specifically the current administration, is fundamentally mistaking Iran's patience for weakness.
Right. For years and years, Iran practiced what they called strategic patience. They absorbed sanctions. They absorbed cyber attacks like Stuxnet. They absorbed assassinations of their top scientists and generals. And they didn't lash out immediately.
And the West looked at that and said,
see, they're weak. They're afraid. Keep squeezing. Eventually they'll crack.
But Alizadeh's point is that this constant pressure actually forced them to evolve. He notes that because they were under such strict sanctions, they couldn't buy parts for their Air Force. They're still flying F-4 Phantoms from 1971. Can you imagine?
Which forced a massive strategic pivot. Since they knew they could never compete with the U.S. in the air, they went all in on missiles. They poured all their resources, all their brain power into missile technology. They turned the missile into a sniper rifle.
That's exactly his point. He talks about them achieving precision within 5 meters. 5 meters from 1,000 kilometers away.
And that is the feral aspect of the analogy. By backing them into a corner, we stripped away all their other options. We forced them to become self-reliant and incredibly lethal in this one specific area. Now, the cat isn't just hissing anymore. It has claws that can reach 2,000 kilometers out into the ocean.
And we have hard proof that they are willing to swipe with those claws. We have hard news. This was confirmed by multiple sources, including Alexander Mercouris and Jackson Hinkle, that a U.S. fighter jet shot down an Iranian drone just yesterday.
This incident, it barely made a ripple in the news cycle, but it is hugely significant.
So where exactly did it happen?
It happened near the USS Abraham Lincoln.
See, that's the key detail. Near the carrier.
Think about what that implies. You don't just stumble upon a U.S. aircraft carrier strike group in the middle of the vast ocean. It's a very big ocean. To send a drone close enough that it has to be shot down by the Combat Air Patrol, that means Iran knew exactly where that carrier group was operating.
They are tracking the fleet.
In real time. This completely destroys the element of surprise. The U.S. Navy's power projection relies on stealth and mobility. If the enemy knows your coordinates at all times, you're not a hunter anymore, you're a target. You're a very large, very expensive sitting duck.
Mercouris, in his analysis, brought up the Falklands War comparison.
It's a chilling parallel, isn't it? Back in 1982, the British Royal Navy was superior to the Argentine Navy in every conceivable way. On paper, it was no contest. But the Argentines had a handful of French-made excess missiles.
And with just those few missiles, they sank the HMS Sheffield, they sank the Atlantic Conveyor, a critical supply ship.
They almost turned the tide of the war with just a few lucky shots.
And missile technology has advanced 40 years since then.
It's not even comparable. Offensive missile technology has advanced much, much faster than defensive shield technology. That is the brutal reality of modern naval warfare. That drone incident, it wasn't an attack. It was a probe. They were testing the perimeter. They were sending a message.
So you mentioned they're tracking the fleet. Iran has decent coastal radar, sure, but over the horizon, in the middle of the Arabian Sea, that requires satellite data.
Which brings us, inevitably, to the Russia connection.
Scott Ritter has been all over this. We know there's a newly ratified strategic security agreement between Iran and Russia, but usually these treaties are just, pieces of paper. We agree to cooperate, that sort of diplomatic fluff.
Ritter's argument is that this one is different. It's not just diplomatic, it's operational. And he points to the recent Starlink blackout in Iran as proof.
Right, let's explain that for a moment. During the recent unrest inside Iran, there were widespread reports that Starlink terminals, which are designed to circumvent local internet blocks, were being systematically jammed.
And not just jammed in a wide area, but pinpointed. Individual terminals were being targeted and shut down. Ritter speculates, and I think it's a very strong speculation, that this wasn't Iranian technology. Iran has jamming capabilities, of course, but to shut down a low Earth orbit satellite constellation feed with that kind of precision requires extremely sophisticated electronic warfare, or EW.
And Russia is the undisputed world leader in EW.
Without a doubt. We've seen them jam Starlink very effectively in Ukraine. The thinking is, if that technology is now in Iran, or even if Russian EW operators are on the ground in Iran, it completely changes the electronic battlefield.
So this leads to the big question, the one everyone is wondering about. If the shooting starts, will Russia actually fight? Does Putin send troops to the Gulf?
No, I don't think so. That's a direct U.S.-Russia conflict. That's a World War III scenario that neither side actually wants. Russia's not going to send infantry to fight in Iran. But, as Scott Ritter argues, they don't need to. They can ensure that the U.S. loses without ever firing a single shot themselves.
How? By providing the intelligence.
Exactly. Imagine the scenario. Iran decides to launch a full salvo of their anti-ship missiles. How do they target them over that vast distance? They use a live, encrypted data feed from Russian reconnaissance satellites. Suddenly, the U.S. Navy isn't fighting a regional power anymore. It's fighting a proxy that has the eyes and ears of a global superpower.
Which segues perfectly and terrifyingly into our second major segment today, because while this potential hot war is brewing in the Gulf, the entire legal framework that kept the nuclear peace between those very superpowers is actively dissolving.
And it's happening tomorrow, February 5th.
The expiration of the New START Treaty.
We really need to pause here and explain what this means, because I think for a lot of people, they hear treaty expires and they think, oh, it's just some paperwork. It's just politics.
But what actually happens at midnight tomorrow? What changes on the ground?
Well, the New START Treaty did a few things. It limited the number of deployed nuclear warheads to 1,550 for both the U.S. and Russia. It also limited the number of delivery vehicles, ICBMs, submarine launchers, heavy bombers. But the most important part, the part that actually built trust, was the inspections regime.
We're talking about American boots on the ground in Russian missile silos, physically counting the warheads, and Russian inspectors doing the same in Montana and North Dakota.
Exactly. 18 on-site inspections per year for each side. We could go into their bases, we could look at the front end of an ICBM, and we could verify that it only had one warhead, not 10 independently targetable ones. We exchanged telemetry data on every single test launch. It created transparency.
Like tomorrow?
All of that goes dark. The lights go out. The window slams shut. We will have absolutely no verified idea what Russia is deploying, and they will have no idea what we're deploying. It's a return to guesswork and worst-case scenario planning.
Scott Ritter and Alexander Mercouris have been, they've been ringing the alarm bell on this for months, and they both note the total baffling lack of urgency in the West. Why isn't this the front page story on every paper?
It is a staggering level of recklessness. We are literally sleepwalking into a new, unconstrained arms race. Mercouris makes the point that we are now entering a trilateral nuclear era. It's not just U.S. versus Russia anymore. It's the U.S., Russia, and China, and we have zero treaties governing any of it.
The breakdown in communication just seems total. I remember a while back, Vladimir Putin offered a 1-year extension, right? He put it on the table, no strings attached.
He did. He said explicitly, let's extend the treaty for 1 year with no preconditions, just to keep the inspections running while we sit down and talk about a new agreement. And President Trump's response at the time was so casual, he just said, that sounds like a good idea.
But then what happened?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. There was no follow-up. No diplomatic team was sent to Geneva or Vienna. Just radio silence.
And Scott Ritter points out that from the Russian perspective, they now view the U.S. as fundamentally untrustworthy when it comes to treaties.
Well, can you really blame them? If you look at it from their point of view, we pulled out of the ABM treaty under George W. Bush. We pulled out of the INF treaty under Donald Trump. We pulled out of the Open Skies treaty. To the Kremlin, New START is just the last domino to fall. They genuinely believe the U.S. wants a new arms race because we think we can spend them into oblivion again, just like we did to the Soviet Union in the 1980s.
But the Russian economy is completely different now, and they are already on a full war footing because of the situation in Ukraine.
And speaking of Ukraine, we absolutely have to address the energy ceasefire fiasco from this past week. It's a perfect, almost tragic example of how the fog of war and political spin are colliding.
So let's establish the timeline on this, because it was genuinely confusing as it was happening. President Trump claimed that he had personally negotiated a one-week halt to Russian strikes on Ukraine's energy grid.
Right. He said he called Putin, asked for a week's pause because of this severe cold wave that was sweeping across Eastern Europe, and Putin agreed to it.
A goodwill gesture, a humanitarian pause.
That was the framing. But then, on February 1st, the strikes resumed. And they weren't just token strikes, they were massive. And President Zelensky almost immediately went public, complaining that the Russians had broken the deal.
But if you look at the fact finder analysis, particularly the one provided by Alexander Mercouris, the timeline tells a very different story. Russia did honor the ceasefire.
For exactly 1 week.
7 days, to the hour.
The week ended. The deal was for a week. Zelensky and his team apparently expected it to last longer, or maybe they hoped it would be extended to February 8th. But the Russians are famously legalistic about these things. 7 days means 7 days.
And because that pause wasn't extended, the hammer dropped.
Absolutely. Since February 1st, Russia has launched some of the heaviest and most sustained strikes of the entire war, specifically targeting Kyiv's thermal power stations. We even have reports of the NATO Secretary General, Mark Rutte, visiting one of the destroyed plants in Kyiv just yesterday.
The visuals from that visit were just grim.
It was almost dystopian, wasn't it? You have Rutte there in his perfectly tailored suit, surrounded by these exhausted-looking Ukrainian officials, and the plant behind them is a twisted ruin of metal. The lights are flickering, and he's standing there talking about long-term security guarantees while the physical infrastructure of the Ukrainian state is literally crumbling around him.
And speaking of guarantees, let's look at the Abu Dhabi talks. We have reports that peace talks are happening right now as we speak in the UAE.
Supposedly. And the U.S. representatives there are, well, there's Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner.
Which is an interesting choice of envoys, to say the least. It's not the Secretary of State. It's not career diplomats from the Foreign Service. It's two real estate guys.
It signals pretty clearly that President Trump is treating this like a business deal, not like a traditional diplomatic summit. But the reports we're getting from sources like Gilbert Doctorow suggest it's a total, complete deadlock.
What's the main sticking point? What's preventing a deal?
It's fundamental. Russia refuses to negotiate based on any framework that includes security guarantees involving Western troops or any kind of NATO presence in Ukraine. They have been crystal clear on this point since day one. No foreign intervention, no NATO on their border, period.
And on the other side, what's the Ukrainian position?
President Zelensky refuses to acknowledge any territorial loss. He will not, under any circumstances, formally give up the Donbass or Zaporizhia.
But the battlefield reality, it seems completely disconnected from that position. We have analysis from Stanislav Krapivnik, a military analyst, that paints a very, very bleak picture for Ukraine's forces on the front.
Krapivnik is extremely plugged in with sources on the ground. He's reporting that Russian forces are now just 11 kilometers from Zaporizhia city itself.
11 kilometers, that's nothing. That's well within conventional artillery range.
It means the city is effectively under siege. And you have to understand, Zaporizhia is the primary logistical hub for the entire southern front for Ukraine. If that central rail hub is interdicted or captured, the supply lines to their forces further east are completely cut.
Krapivnik also talks in his analysis about this concept of the PR war versus the real war. This, for me, was the most disturbing part of his entire assessment.
He calls it the bad Van Damme movie strategy.
Explain that analogy.
He describes the Ukrainian military launching what are essentially suicide missions, with a sole purpose of planting a flag somewhere for a photo op. He points specifically to the 2023 counteroffensive. We all remember the breathless headlines, Ukraine counterattacks, breakthrough imminent.
Right.
But Krapivnik notes the horrific cost. 85,000 dead.
85,000.
Let that number sink in. 85,000 casualties. And for what? To take a field of about 120 square kilometers, a handful of villages that are now nothing but rubble. Krapivnik's argument is that Kiev is knowingly trading blood for headlines, just to keep the Western funding and weapons flowing. They publicly announce where they're going to attack. They attack directly into heavily prepared Russian defenses, and their soldiers get slaughtered.
And he says they're running out of soldiers.
The manpower just isn't there anymore. You can see it in the press ganging videos that are leaking out of Ukraine. The Russian steamroller is moving methodically. Chasiv Yar is about to fall. Krapivnik argues that once that canal line is breached, the road to the Dnieper River is wide open.
So we've got a collapsing front in Ukraine, a potential naval war with Iran, and the complete end of nuclear arms control. You would think, with all this chaos erupting abroad, the domestic front would at least be stable.
You would hope so. But that brings us right back home. And it's looking just as volatile and just as fractured.
Segment 3. ICE, civil rights, and this troubling concept of the surge.
And this is where you really see foreign policy bleeding directly into domestic policy. You can't run a militarized empire abroad for decades without eventually militarizing your police forces at home. The tactics always come home.
We have to talk about the congressional hearings that happened this week. Breaking points, Kim Iverson in particular covered this extensively. The testimony from ICE survivors, honestly, it was just difficult to even read the transcripts.
It was harrowing stuff. And it completely shatters the official narrative that ICE is only targeting dangerous criminals and hardened gang members.
Let's look at the specific case of Miramar Martinez. She's an American citizen, born and raised in Chicago.
A citizen. Let's just keep emphasizing that point. This is not about immigration status.
She was pulled over. The situation escalated very quickly, and she was shot 5 times by an ICE agent.
And the agent's defense, of course, was that he feared for his life. The standard line. But then the agent's own text messages came out in court.
This is the kind of hard data we promised to bring you. Her attorney presented a text message that was sent by the shooter, an Agent Charles Exum, to his colleagues literally minutes after the shooting.
Read the text.
The text message said, quote, 5 shots, 7 holes. Put that in your book, boys.
5 shots, 7 holes. He was bragging. He was bragging about the ballistics of his ammunition, about the damage he had just inflicted on a human being. It's chilling.
And the worst part of it all, the system then tried to cover it up. Prosecutors initially tried to charge her. They claimed she had rammed the agent with her vehicle.
But then the surveillance video surfaced, as it so often does.
And the video showed she was driving away. She was trying to flee a man with a gun who was not in a marked police car. And the video shows he rammed her with his vehicle, pinned her door shut, and then emptied his clip through her car window.
And if that video had not existed, she would be in prison right now, paralyzed and charged with assault on a federal officer.
Then you have the case of Aliyah Rahman, a disabled woman. She was on her way to a brain injury appointment. She got caught in a traffic jam caused by an unannounced ICE checkpoint.
And the testimony detailed how agents were just shouting conflicting commands at all the drivers. One agent was yelling, stop, another was yelling, move forward. And she, with a cognitive disability, was understandably confused.
And because she hesitated for a moment,
they smashed her driver's side window, they used a knife to cut her seatbelt, and they dragged her out of the car and threw her onto the pavement.
She testified that she was screaming at them, I'm disabled, I have a brain injury. And what was the agent's reply?
Too late?
This isn't just a case of a few bad apples, is it? Elton Colonel Bill Astor, a military historian, analyzes this whole phenomenon through the lens of policy. He calls it the surge.
Astor is a sharp guy. He notes that the term surge comes directly from the Iraq War. It was the name for the 2007 escalation, the Baghdad surge.
And now we're seeing that same terminology used here. The border czar, Tom Homan, just announced a drawdown of 700 agents in Minneapolis. On the surface, that sounds like de-escalation, doesn't it?
But you have to look at the fine print. Homan is simultaneously integrating CBP, that's Customs and Border Protection, directly into ICE, creating what he calls a unified chain of command.
What does that mean in practical terms?
It means that the Border Patrol, which operates in this sort of constitutional gray zone at the actual border, is being merged with IC, which operates in the interior of the country. Astor argues that this is the explicit transfer of war on terror tactics to domestic policing.
He makes the point that many of these agents are combat veterans of places like Fallujah or Kandahar.
Right. And when you take someone who has been trained for years to see the local population as potential insurgents, and you drop them into a suburb in Minneapolis, they don't just switch off that training. They start treating American citizens like enemy combatants.
And the political fallout from all this is becoming massive. Kim Iverson talks about the Abolish IC movement becoming the Democrat Tea Party moment.
It is becoming a powerful rallying cry. Just like repeal Obamacare galvanized the right a decade ago, Abolish IC is now coalescing and radicalizing the progressive base.
But there's a much darker political angle to this as well, isn't there? The election integrity angle. And for that, we have a quote from Steve Bannon.
And Bannon, as usual, doesn't mince words.
He said on his program, quote, "You're damn right we're going to have IC surround the polls come November."
Just think about the profound chilling effect of that single statement.
Iverson lays this out perfectly. Imagine you're a legal voting citizen. Maybe you were naturalized 10 years ago. Maybe you were born here, but your parents weren't. You have an accent. You look Hispanic or Middle Eastern or South Asian.
And you walk up to your local polling station at the elementary school, and you see armed federal agents in tactical gear standing around the entrance.
Do you still go inside to vote?
Probably not. You decide it's just not worth the risk. Not worth the risk of being detained, of being harassed, of being driven 3 states away for processing, and then being told, oops, sorry, our mistake, 3 days later after the election is over.
It is voter suppression through state-sanctioned intimidation.
It's using the apparatus of the militarized police force to actively shape the electorate. And that, historically, is a hallmark of failing democracies.
So we have militarized police at home, we have brewing wars abroad, and now on top of all that, we have the elites in what looks like a state of absolute sheer panic.
Yeah, Epstein documents.
2.7 million pages of them released to the public.
And we have to remember, that's out of a total of 6 million pages. We're still missing more than half of the total archive. This is just the beginning.
But what is already out there is absolutely devastating. George Galloway did a monologue on this that was just scorching. He called it a sewage dump on the ruling class.
He's not wrong. It's the sheer, awful banality of the evil contained in those files that really gets to you.
Let's look at some of the specific allegations that have surfaced just this week. Peter Mandelson, a major British political figure, the architect of New Labour.
The Prince of Darkness, as he's known in the UK press. The files alleged that he received £75,000 and his husband received £10,000 directly from Jeffrey Epstein.
And Mandelson's official response is that he has no recollection of the gift.
Which Galloway, I think rightly, just macks. How do you forget a £75,000 gift? I mean, either you're so monumentally corrupt that 75 grand is just pocket change to you, or the reason for that gift is so horrible that you've deliberately blocked it from your memory.
Then you've got Bill Gates. The files contain this bizarre cryptic email regarding antibiotics for his wife's martini.
That phrase alone. Antibiotics for his wife's martini. The immediate implication is that he needed to medicate her without her knowledge, perhaps because of something he had brought home with him. It just shatters that carefully cultivated public image of the kindly, sweater-wearing philanthropist.
And the royal family. We all knew about Prince Andrew. That story's been out for years. But Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York?
Fergie? Yes. The files show what can only be described as begging letters from her to Epstein. She was desperately asking him for money. She was promising him complete privacy if he visited Buckingham Palace.
She was essentially renting out access to the British monarchy to a known convicted pedophile.
It's grotesque. And it shows that the entire elite class was willing to just look the other way to hold their noses as long as the cash was flowing.
But here comes the spin, and this is where we have to be really careful and analytical as we watch this unfold. There is a massive, coordinated effort now emerging to frame this entire scandal as a Russian intelligence operation.
Alex Christoforou at the Duran calls this Russiagate 2.0.
The Polish Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, just announced a formal probe linking Epstein to Russia. He's claiming that Epstein was a honey trap operation designed by the KGB and later the FSB to compromise and blackmail Western leaders.
It's a very convenient narrative, isn't it? Because if Epstein was a Russian spy, then everyone who visited his island, everyone in his black book, is suddenly just a victim of Russian aggression. It completely absolves them of any moral responsibility for their own actions.
But the hard data, the documents themselves, contradict this narrative. Christopher highlights emails from 2012 that were found in these very files.
And this is the smoking gun against the Tusk theory. In those 2012 emails, Jeffrey Epstein was actively discussing regime change against Vladimir Putin. He was plotting with his Western intelligence contacts about how to destabilize the Russian government.
So the idea that he was a Russian asset is directly contradicted by his own internal communications. He was actively working against Russia's interests.
Exactly. So the obvious question is, why is Donald Tusk doing this? Why is the Western media so eagerly picking up this Russian spy angle?
It's the elite panic. They are desperate for a distraction.
They need a way to discredit the files themselves. If they can convince the general public that the Epstein documents are just more Russian disinformation, maybe people stop reading them. Maybe the public's anger will be redirected away from them and towards Putin instead.
It's a desperate, almost reflexive attempt to use the Russia card as a shield to protect themselves.
And it really shows you how terrified they are. They know that public trust in institutions is hanging by a single thread.
From the panicked elites to the desperate streets of Havana, we have to talk about Cuba. Segment 5.
And this is a quiet tragedy unfolding in real time, and it is being almost completely ignored by the U.S. media.
President Trump has signed a new executive order, and on its face it targets Mexico, but the real target is clearly Cuba.
It effectively threatens what you could call nuclear tariffs, figuratively speaking, of course, on any company or any country that facilitates energy transfers to the island. So if Mexico sells oil to Cuba, the U.S. threatens to shut down all trade with Mexico.
We have some incredible on-the-ground analysis from the Blowback podcast. The hosts, Noah Collin and Brendan James, they were just in Cuba. They saw the effects of this policy firsthand.
And what they describe is nothing short of a humanitarian catastrophe.
They talked about the national energy grid facing total rolling blackouts for hours every day, but it's the small daily life details that really get to me. They met rural families who haven't received their government allotment of cooking gas since August of last year.
Just think about that for a second. No gas, no reliable electricity. They're cooking with wood and charcoal. In 2026, in the Western Hemisphere, just 90 miles from our coast,
9 million people are facing a forced return to the 19th century.
And the political contradiction at the heart of this policy is just stark.
Yeah.
Brennan James points this out beautifully. Trump's entire platform is MAGA, right? America first. It's supposed to be about non-interventionism.
But this Cuba policy is pure, unadulterated neocon doctrine. It has the fingerprints of the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, all over it.
Rubio is a hawk on Cuba. This is his personal vendetta. The goal is explicit: regime change. Starve the island until the government collapses and the people rise up.
But let's just play that scenario out for a moment. Donald Trump's #1 signature issue is hating illegal immigration, building the wall.
Correct.
So what happens if the Cuban regime actually collapses? You get chaos, you get state failure, you might even get a civil war. And what happens when you have total chaos just 90 miles from the coast of Florida?
You get refugees. You get millions of them.
You get a massive, unprecedented refugee crisis, the Mariel boat lift of 1980, but 10, maybe 20 times larger.
And where are all those people going to go? They're not going to swim to Mexico. They are coming straight to Florida.
So by trying to strangle Cuba to please the neocons in his cabinet, Trump is potentially creating the single biggest border crisis in American history, right in his own backyard, right before an election.
It's a policy that is actively eating its own tail. It is the definition of strategic incoherence. You cannot have closed borders and regime change as simultaneous foreign policy goals. Regime change creates migration. It's cause and effect.
Okay, let's try to pull back. We have covered a staggering amount of ground today. We have the naval standoff in Iran, we have the collapse of the front in Ukraine, the expiration of all nuclear treaties, the militarization of IC at home, the explosive Epstein files, the manufactured crisis in Cuba.
It really does feel like the world is spinning off its axis.
So what is the thread here? How do we connect all of these seemingly disparate dots? Because they can't be isolated events.
The thread, I think, is fracture.
Yeah.
The rules-based international order, that phrase that politicians love to use, is fracturing and breaking apart right in front of our eyes.
Explain what you mean by that.
For the last 30 years, since the fall of the Soviet Union, the U.S. could more or less dictate the terms. We decided who was allowed to have nukes. We decided who could trade with whom. We decided whose borders were sovereign and whose weren't. That era is over.
And what we're seeing now are the symptoms of that end.
Exactly. The U.S. is critically overextended. We're risking a humiliating naval defeat in the Persian Gulf because we can't accept that Iran is now a major regional power. We are risking a massive refugee crisis from Cuba because we can't accept that their government, for better or worse, still exists. We are ignoring the New START expiration because we've become too arrogant to negotiate as equals.
And what about at home?
When an empire overextends abroad, it always tightens the grip at home. That is the surge. That is the militarized police. We are beginning to treat our own citizens with the same level of suspicion and hostility that we treat our foreign adversaries. The empire's coming home.
So as we wrap up, what is the one thing you need to remember from all of this for the rest of the week?
For me, it all comes down to one date, February 5th, tomorrow.
The expiration of New START.
When that treaty officially expires at midnight tomorrow, the safety rails are officially off the world. We are entering a new era with absolutely no limits on the deadliest weapons ever created by humankind. And that single fact changes the calculus of every other conflict we have discussed today. If the US and Russia are suddenly in an unconstrained, panicked arms race, the margin for error in places like Ukraine or Iran drops to absolute zero.
It raises the stakes of everything, everywhere, all at once.
It absolutely does.
And here's a final thought for you to mull over. We've talked today about the Iranian drone tracking the U.S. fleet. We've talked about Russian satellites potentially helping Iran target those ships. We've talked about the Epstein files being used as a distraction. But I want you to ask yourself this. In a world where the mighty U.S. Navy can be tracked in real time by its adversaries, and where the domestic population is increasingly treated as a threat by its own government, who is actually besieged, is it Iran, is it Cuba, or is it us?
That is the question.
If you found this analysis valuable, hit the plus or follow button on your podcast app and give us a like. Subscribe to the Hot News channel for more deep dives. Until we meet again, goodbye.